Namo. Thanks so much for joining me for our daily practice check-in. Listen, listen, listen. This wonderful sound calls us back to our true home. The first mindfulness training. Aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life, I vow to cultivate compassion and learn ways to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and minerals. I'm determined not to kill, not to let others kill, and not to condone any act of killing in the world, in my thinking, or in my way of life. For our Dharma lessons, we're reading More Than Mindfulness, Widening the Field of Practice by the Monastics of Abhayagiri Monastery. Today we're continuing in a Dharma talk by Ajahn Viradhamma called Mindfulness, Vitality, and Inquiry. We say in our teachings, mindfulness is the path of the deathless. Heedlessness, those who are heedless, are already dead. The Buddha's enlightenment is about this deep and profound possibility in human consciousness. He said that as human beings, the possibility of enlightenment is ours as well, if we can know, if we can reflect, if we can be aware. It's a very optimistic teaching. Also, it is a spiritual teaching in the sense that it's not just about reorganizing the furniture in your consciousness. It's about the deep possibility which his enlightenment is part of. A possibility which is realized through awareness. Mindfulness is the path of the deathless. The deathless is the way the Buddha couched the deepest spiritual realization for human beings. It is not couched in a theological way. It's not couched in a dualistic way. That is something outside of you. It is couched in this particular way. Mindfulness is the path to the deathless. That is a very important line in my tradition, and I've pondered that a lot. Mindfulness is about being awake. When I began this sitting session, I said, just listen. That's a common way that one is encouraged to remember mindfulness. Just listen. That listening quality is not just about sound, but about that attentiveness, that wakefulness, that presence. This is actually very simple, but we tend to forget. We tend to get lost in our projections, lost in our problems, and lost in the complexity of thought, the past and the future. When we talk about mindfulness, we also talk about the ability to remember, to be mindful, not in terms of some memory I had or some experience that in the past, but remembering the present moment. There's a story about one of my peers doing practice in his hut in Thailand. He would set his clock for an hour, then started meditating, and he would find himself cutting his toenails. He didn't know how he got there. He's better now. You can make a determination to watch the breath, and the mind is just gone. It's off thinking about whatever one thinks about in the past and in the future. It's a training that needs to be encouraged. How do you become more continuously mindful? One can make suggestions to oneself, such as, I'm going to try to be here now. That might not sound like much, but that suggestion is a lot. Because by making that suggestion to oneself, I'll try to be here. When I'm not here, I will certainly notice it. What happens to yogis and meditators is that they become very self-critical. Oh, I'm not aware, and they're not aware of their criticism. There can be a kind of negativity, self-criticism, judgment, a heaviness about it, and one begins to not like the practice. Not like it because it's coming from a place of, I can't do it, I'm inadequate, I'm not getting there, I'm not mindful. These are all very negative suggestions to the mind. If I make a lot of negative suggestions to the practice, I'm not going to want to do it. It's very important when we are awake to feel grateful. It's important to notice and to open the mind. not to try to get anything, because there's nothing you really need to get. This might not sound like much, but for me it was a big thing, because I would just lose it. I would do walking meditation and half an hour would go by and I would be singing Bob Dylan songs. Where are you? The tendency was to be very diligent and hardworking, but to be very critical. That was a very unhappy way to go about it. I had to come to a very sober realization. I haven't trained my mind, and I'm not going to be present for much of the time. But when I do wake up, when something awakens me like a sound or pain, then that's there. I need to really appreciate that. What does it feel like to be present? What is it like to be here now? That suggestion to be here now is what makes mindfulness more continuous in consciousness. The remembering of what it means to be present, the feeling of being present, and the sense of gratitude for being present, to really begin to know what presence is. Then that factor becomes more powerful. May all beings be well. May all beings be happy. May all beings be at peace. Namo Adida Phat. Thanks so much for joining me today.